The Rockpile Report, the pettiest, hardest drinking Bills podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Rockpile Report podcast. We are here talking about draft season. We're here, and really, we're not the smart people. You know that. Which is why every week we bring you another guest, and this week, one of our longest tenured draft guests, Russell Brown. Russell Brown of Fantasy Pros, formerly of Cover One. A lot of you might remember him from his work over there with those guys, and a half dozen other places in between. I mean, you stay busy, sir.
Yeah, I do appreciate the intro, the welcome. That's a strong welcome right there. Probably the strongest one I've heard. So appreciate that. But yeah, no, staying busy, doing well. Draft season is here, and 2 weeks till the draft, basically tomorrow. So excited for it. Hope you guys are doing well. Appreciate you for bringing me back.
We absolutely are. Now, every year you put together your own draft guide. First of all, right from the top, where can people find it?
It has not dropped yet. It's going to drop on Fantasy Pros within the coming days with some prospect rankings and things like that. So there'll be, over the next couple of days, my quarterback rankings, running back rankings, wide receiver rankings, and tight end rankings, the rankings that really affect fantasy football. But in each one of those articles, you'll find the draft guide. It'll be free to download. You download the PDF, look at strengths, weaknesses from my viewpoint, stack your board against mine. We'll see who's right and just have some fun with it. There'll be some charities in there if you're interested in donating that I do every year because I just give the guide away for free. But it's always fun, so always appreciate everybody checking it out.
And also, like, so you do your work over at Fantasy Pros, you have your draft guide, and you're still a Lions fan. This last year had to be so vindicating for you. Yeah. It had to be so vindicating.
Man, it's interesting. I was talking to Anthony Prohashka because he's a good friend of mine through Cover One and everything, and we've really grown to just be friends over the years. But like seeing Bills fans go it through the playoff run and the kind of the changing of the guard from the old guard to the new guard and just the new winning style that has been brought to Buffalo, and just seeing the reaction of Eric and Greg and Anthony and Aaron and even you guys, and just the Bills following that I have. I mean, all the people that reach out to me, I mean, there's so many. And I'm like, man, these guys are living it up. They're loving it. I hope my team can get there. And we experienced it last year for the first time in like my life that I can remember. I mean, like 31 years ago, I was just a kid in diapers, So I'm like, I've never experienced this. So I go to the playoff game with my son and we experience it together. And like, I got tears in my eyes and he's like, what is going on? And I'm like, yeah, no, I'm good. This is just like weight off my shoulder. I can say I saw one, and to be this close away from a Super Bowl and not get it, it just sucks. But it was a great run this season, and I just so thankful for being able to kind of experience it.
And the best part is you guys look primed to still have it doesn't seem
not
like
a one-off.
It doesn't seem like a one-off. The way you guys were winning, the way your coach approaches the game, this thing has legs.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see how the Lions go over the next 3 or 4 years, and what they do with that franchise, because it's been incredible to watch just the way they've brought this whole thing around. It was easy to sit back here. I think we probably did a segment because we're hacks, laughing at Dan Campbell and his crazy introductory press conference about biting kneecaps and
the amount of espresso he drinks.
Yeah, it's like, dude, just do cocaine at that point. What are you doing?
Yeah.
And at the same time, you can't argue with results, right? Yeah. This is the ultimate meritocracy, football.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was one of those where it was like the first year, it was like, man, we went 3-13-1. We started 0-11-1. And then the following year, we ended up going 9-8. And we were like 1-6 or 1-7 to start. And at that point, we were 4-20-1 or whatever it was. And I'm like, this guy's not the answer. He says all the right stuff, but results matter, and we're not winning football games. And then I said that, and they went and won 6 or 7 in a row. And then this past year happened, and I'm just like, he's the right guy. And the thing that I think a lot of teams struggle with, and we as fans forget it, or we as, analysts or whatever you want to call everybody, but we forget that there's got to be an identity within an organization. The Bills have they for a long time they had an identity, right? They had those veteran guys like Jordan Poyer and Hyde and even, you know, Deion Dawkins and all these players, and now it's like, well, now those guys are gone, and obviously Dawkins is still there, but you know, those guys are gone, and it's like, okay, what's this team going to look like now? And the Lions, what was their identity? And we're starting to see that identity come to life. So I think we always forget about that.
Well, and the reason I ask these, the reason why I wanted to establish this ascension of the Lions as part of this conversation is because one of the biggest stumbling blocks of your franchise and one of the biggest changes that nobody seems to really have noticed if you're not a Lions fan is that over the last 2 years, your team completely rebuilt what was regularly one of the NFL's worst offensive lines into a unit that is full of household names and guys with a lot of high floor talent. Mm-hmm. You know, from tackle to tackle across the board. And Frank Ragnow, like that's one of those names where if you're a casual fan, you probably don't know why it matters, but it matters. Yeah. You know, guys, when you look at Taylor Decker, you go, Taylor Decker, you're like, yeah, Taylor Decker's a veteran. He's good at what he does. Will he ever be talked about in the top 3 to 10 players to ever play the position? No, but it doesn't matter. He's better than the other other team's guy on most Sundays. Right. Penny Sewell, really coming into his own. Mm-hmm. Like, you guys built a formidable offensive line, and as you went, so did the Lions. And you all of a sudden saw the offense take off. It's not by accident. You have to build a house with a solid foundation, or else you can't build on top of it. It'll collapse.
Yeah. And I think the Bills, they saw it too. I mean, you look at, sure, there's been some development with like Spencer Brown and stuff like that, but you know, they were trying to make it work with a bunch of banged up veterans on the interior, or they would draft a 3rd or a 4th round tackle and hope he plays at guard. Or, you know, you look at like Tommy Doyle and you're hoping like that guy's waiting in the wings and you're like, man, I hope this guy's it. We took him in the 4th or 5th round and turns out he's probably not that guy, but you end up turning around and you're like, if you build this thing in the trenches, it helps you give an identity. And I think people forget that, you know, running the football matters. The Lions go back to running the football a lot. I mean, there's some drives where they run it 7-8 times in a row. They're running for it on 3rd and 6. They're handing it off to David Montgomery and they're picking it up. And it's like the simplicity of the offense and just of the organization has led to just fascinating results. And it's been great as a fan. It kind of put me behind the 8 ball from draft content per se, you know, because I was so into the Lions wire and covering the team and doing the playoff stuff, and like all of a sudden it was over and I'm like, I'm in Mobile for the Senior Bowl and I'm like, now it's draft mode. I got to like turn this on. I got to get going. So like we're caught up and we're good, but it's a crazy ride when your team is good. I never experienced it, so I got to do that. It's cool.
And I'm pumped because nobody deserves it more than you, brother. Thanks, now, I'll raise a glass to that. Now, Chris, what did you make for us tonight?
So going within the theme of our draft content, we're doing old fashions in the way of our guests. Okay. Russ, resident of Michigan. I read on Google that Michigan is known for some tart cherries.
Okay.
Went to the liquor store today. Now, mind you, we live in Buffalo. Mm-hmm. I hit up all the liquor stores in Buffalo. I'm looking for bourbon whiskey specific to Michigan. And I give it a goog, Journeyman's Distillery. I've seen that in stores. The last week, I've been hunting that in stores. Couldn't find any. Today, I drove to Niagara Falls. Specifically to look for Journeyman's Distillery, and I found their Pit Spitter cherry whiskey. So we have old fashions with a bar spoon of pecan syrup, an ounce of Journeyman's Pit Spitter cherry whiskey, an ounce and a quarter of Wild Turkey 101, and toasted almond bitters for a Michigan Russ Brown old fashioned.
See, now here's Russ. I'm not going to lie to you. I thought what he was going to do is throw just a bunch of vermouth in a glass with some bourbon. And when I went to go sip it, I was going to be like, why is this the Russ Brown cocktail? And then he was going to go, oh, no, I get it, because it's just not that fucking good.
I could have just put motor oil in it. And
yeah, you could have did that. I mean,
awesome.
Some water from a Great Lake or something.
It remains a highlight of our podcast, our draft content all time. Like, people still reach out to us about it. It's hilarious. So if we talk about the offensive line and the way that the Bills are currently constructed, just as the way I see it, they're in a weird place. Because if you're thinking about how they put this together, our starting 5 are all NFL caliber. Okay? You've got 5 starting NFL caliber players. And, well, they're not full of household names. There's a solid mix of experience and upside. Mm-hmm. You've got at tackle the recently extended Deion Dawkins, who durable, reliable. Again, you're probably not putting a gold jacket on him, but at the same time, he's serviceable and at a lot of times better than anything any of our divisional counterparts can put out on a field on a given day. So that's good for your franchise. Spencer Brown, nice bounce back from a sophomore slump. He had a nice season last year. Still hasn't realized all of his potential. You know, his mobility at that size is what makes him sexy, right? It's the size, but it's the power, and it's also the way he blends it with speed. He still needs to learn how to get to the second level more consistently. And his pass protection, his kick slide still isn't smooth. You can still beat him around an edge. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's just he's never going to get there because of his size. You know, they talk about hip flexion and how low can you keep your ass while still keeping like there's a whole thing about working the arc that like there's a reason I played guard when I played football. I couldn't do it. I didn't have a kick slide at all. So you see this though, he's a guy who could still get paid a pretty decent amount of money as a right tackle in the NFL when his contract ends at the end of this year. And then on the interior, you've got longtime backup Ryan Bates and Ike Bacher kind of surprised everybody when the Bills divested and just shipped one out, let the other one go. It was a cap space move, but they also found players that they thought were better suited to what we want to do in terms of a zone-style blocking scheme. That costs less than the aggregate. So now you have a David Edwards and Osiris Torrance on a rookie contract. I think all in you're paying less than $5 million for both your starting guards. That's pretty good.
That's very good. Very good.
Edwards is reliable. I just don't know where his floor is, and that scares me. Like, he came in on – everyone likes to point to, like, oh, look at this zone run against the Cowboys. That game, we just ran it down their throats, and Josh came out after the game and said that he felt like the kid at a college group project that didn't contribute but still got an A. He's like, I threw for 96 yards, and we dominated this football team. Edwards came in and played a lot of those snaps, and people point at those and like to say, well, look, see what he can be. Yeah, but there's a reason he was available on the open market for us to pick up in the first place. So let's keep that in mind as well. And he's on a contract that's structured that it doesn't hurt us if he's a backup, right? I think it's under $3 million, Chris, if you can give that a goog. Torrance won the starting job over Ryan Bates out of training camp last year. We know what he is, and we hope he can improve. Good pass protector, good in the run game with his size and just his anchor. I look at the center position, and that's where this whole thing gets murky, right? They move on from Mitch Morse, cap move. They asked him to take less. He said no, rightfully so, and then ended up taking about $4 million less to play for the Jaguars.
Right.
And they shuffled last year's left guard into his place, and they keep telling everybody, hey, it doesn't – guys, we trust him. He's never really done it at this level, but we know he can do it.
Yep.
Maybe he's a solid stopgap if the board doesn't fall your way, but there's a question mark there, and it's the pivot. I mean, it's one of the more important positions in football. And then behind them is this interesting mix of veteran NFL players with starting experience. Chris, I'm old enough to remember when Rex Ryan was trying to he was taking Lyle Collins out for seafood with his family and trying to get him to sign with the Buffalo Bills. And now he's here. And it's weird because it's like, I'm so old.
Right. It doesn't feel like he's been playing that long, and it's like, man, Collins been playing for a little while, man.
It's almost been a decade. Where did the time go? What happened to us? You throw in Will Clapp, who has some starting experience at center if you want to call what he did starting as an NFL caliber center. And then a bunch of UDFAs that they brought out of camp last year that just kind of flesh out the roster. They like him, but also, do you want that guy starting for Deion Dawkins or Spencer Brown? Or, God forbid, you lose both tackles. Do you want that guy protecting Josh's blind side? It's not bad. It's just limited. And is that a good way to describe it if you were in my shoes?
No, I think you're spot on. I have some concerns about McGovern in the middle. Just because center's an important position. And I'm not saying he's not capable, but I don't expect the organization to come out and say, no, we need a center. We lost Morris. We moved on. He wouldn't take the pay cut. We got to figure this out. You're not going to show your cards to anybody, because anybody in front of you that's looking for interior offensive line help, Miami Dolphins at 21, if they need help at guard or center, they could take the guy that potentially the Bills want. So you're going to say, no, we have what we need, and you make kind of an oddball move and move Stephon Diggs. And I understand why they did that whole thing. And it's like, okay, well, does that necessarily mean they're going wide receiver in the first round? It could be, but I don't think so. I think it's more so, hey, now nobody really knows what we're going to do, and now we can take a potential starting guard or center, and now we've shorn up the middle of our offensive line.
You have flexibility, is what Brandon Beane has done. Is he's given himself, like we just did a show about the whole Stephon Diggs thing, and where I landed is, I don't care about social media. I don't have emotions about football players. Like the contract that I feel like we as fans have with players should be, you do the thing that I enjoy. You play the game for my team. If you do it well, I'm going to applaud. And if you do it well, I'm going to boo and I'm going to heckle. And if you do it poorly for long enough, they'll get you out of here and somebody else will come in and I can either applaud or heckle them. And that's the cycle. I'm not replaceable. They are.
Exactly.
I don't care what they do off the football field. Do the job, I'll cheer or clap. Now, obviously, there's some limitations to that. Like, there's some limitations to, hey, like, I don't care about what you do off the field. But realistically, he's a diva. Okay, that's his proclivity, man. I'm not going to tell him who to be. If he wants to have two chicks in the same hotel on the same night, who am I to tell him how to live, man?
Right. He caught 100 passes for us last year.
Who would have thought that guy might be an egomaniac?
Right.
Shocker.
Right.
So I guess where I land on this is that all of the things that they do and don't do, what Beane did here was give himself the most flexibility possible entering this season and next year and the following year. But there's a need here. And if I were to take a look at the draft and look at our offensive line situation, I'd rank it center, guard, and swing tackle. Now, Collins is probably fine. I think if you look at the money they gave him, they envision him being their swing tackle. So I don't know that there's going to be a lot of room there to add a body unless they really don't believe in, or if the board falls in such a way that they believe they can upgrade from one of these undrafted free agents that are currently on the roster.
Right.
Guard is intriguing because David Edwards is not he might fit based on what Aaron Cromer saw in him last year. Mm-hmm. But also, again, there was a reason he was available for us in the first place. So you might want to hedge your bets and try to find another, or you watch and see if another Osiris Torrance doesn't fall to you, to where the value is just so good you can't say no at that pick. Because you know you're getting I hate to say off-the-bus starter because Doug Whaley ruined that for everybody, but a player who can come in and challenge a veteran. Mm-hmm. And the way that they kind of paid him and his contract almost makes it seem like they might be angling for something like that. And then there's obviously the center position, which is the silver tuna of the entire conversation. So I kind of want to start there with you. When you talk about center, every fan knows Jackson Powers Johnson because they listen to a handful of podcasts, they look at every pundit's big board, and all they see is that first round and that there's only one guy with a C next to his name in there. I doubt, given our needs at defensive end and wide receiver, right? Like your hierarchy of needs as a football team go quarterback, guy who catches the ball, actually guy who sacks the quarterback, guy who catches the ball from the quarterback, guy who protects the quarterback, and you just go down the line.
Yeah.
I feel like given our needs at these other positions, I don't see them spending a first round pick on a center. It's possible, but I really just don't see it. And so in that way, I look at it though, second round, third round. Like, hey, Chris, wouldn't it have been nice if instead of Boogie Basham, we drafted Creed Humphrey?
That would have been cool.
I'm gonna text Greg about that right now.
I'll clip this and send it to him.
I will never forget where I was. I was at my old house in the basement on a live stream with Anthony, doing the Cover One stuff, and we were both sitting there like Creed Humphrey, Creed Humphrey, Creed Humphrey, and it's Carlos Basham, and I was not a Carlos Basham guy. Anthony was kind of so-so about it, and I'm like, my hands just went like this, and I'm like, oh my God. I couldn't believe it.
I'll do you one better. I had just gotten the COVID shot that day, and I was going through the bottoms of my feet ached. And I'm like, but this doesn't make any sense, what's happening to me. Yeah. And then I look at the TV, and I see the Bills on the clock, and I go, I see the two players right there, Basham and Humphrey. And I go, man, that sucks because the Chiefs are just going to get another pass rusher that they don't fucking need. And I'm really tired of them scooping up good pass rush talent in later rounds. Mm-hmm. And then the Bills took Basham and they immediately took Humphrey. And I just shut the TV off and pulled the blanket over my head and was like, nope, we've had enough for today. I'm going to sleep. I can't deal with this. I
don't blame you at all. I would have done the same thing.
Greg flips out. It's the first. His cousin listened to the segment of where I questioned Greg about it, and I kind of just threw it at him, almost like an insult, and he snapped. It's the first time. He goes, I've never heard my cousin yell before in my entire life. What did you say to Greg?
Yeah. Yeah, he doesn't get mad easy.
It's a testament to just how good I am at being an ass that I was able to get that reaction. But so the reality is because we didn't take that opportunity, we now are stuck in kind of the same position where you can't spend a first-round pick on this, but you have a need, and maybe it's time to answer that before you try just some shitty stopgap option.
Yeah.
So if we talk about guys who you're targeting beyond day one, which I think everyone's in the... First of all, is everyone in the consensus JPJ is the only first-round center? Or do you think there could be multiple?
Well, I mean, I think it's such a deep offensive line group collectively, offensive tackle and interior offensive line, and you have guys that I think could make it as a tackle. For example, Graham Barton out of Duke, a hair shy of 33-inch arms, right? People are going to say, well, it's not long enough. I think he did fine in the ACC as a left tackle. He started right away as like a 17, 18-year-old kid playing center. He can do a variety of things for that offensive line and at Duke and for any team that drafts him. Now, I don't think he's going to be on the clock or available on the clock when the Bills are there. So I think it's one of those where, all right, Barton's going to be gone. Jackson Powers-Johnson is true center. Yeah, probably going to be gone, but his range is interesting because there's been some speculation like, well, where does he fit? Like once you start going through certain teams and you're like, all right, they go receiver, they go defense, they go offensive tackle. Suddenly JPJ is getting closer and closer potentially to pick 28. And it's like, is it in reaching distance for them to maybe even move up to, let's say, 26 or maybe even 25 and take them? I know trading up for a center, how dare them, but they have the capital. And let's be honest, they're not going to use all of these picks. They're like, they have 11 or 12 picks. If they walk away with 11 or 12 draft picks, I'll be out of my mind. Like that would be nuts.
Yeah. Especially having a second round pick next year that allows them to kind of weaponize this year's first if an opportunity presented itself.
Exactly. So I think it's...
I was about to say, it's funny you mentioned Graham Barton. I bookmarked this specifically for this conversation. I was pulling out my phone to find it. So some guy tweeted out, if you're going to have Jordan Morgan in your offensive tackle rankings, then Graham Barton better be in them too. And it's this picture of you've got a fat dude with no shirt on, and it's listing Graham Barton's size, 6'5" and 3/8, 313, 32 and 7/8 inch arms. And it just says, put a shirt on, fat boy. And on the other side, it's Lizzo, and it says Jordan Morgan, 6'5", 311, 32 and 7/8, and it's empowering. That is the thing that draft people do. For some reason, they look at these dark horses, and they go, oh, but this is what I love about this guy. Yeah, but there's a guy who has those almost same measurables and yet better tape. Stop doing this just for the sake of conjecture.
Yeah. No, and it happens year in and year out. Like one of my first interactions ever with Ben Solak, who's now with the Ringer, and all that stuff. We were all kind of coming up together on the same website before I went to Cover One, and he went and did his thing and whatever. And we were talking about Deion Dawkins, and I was like, I think he's a guard, and he's like, no, man, he's a tackle. He can play tackle, and here he is. Yeah. He's playing tackle, and it's like, so I have Graham Barton and Jordan Morgan both listed as interior offensive linemen for me, but it wouldn't surprise me if both of them ended up playing tackle in the NFL. So, like, I could see that being the case. But back to JPJ, could he be there? Yes. Probably. I don't think so, but at the same time, I could see it. And I will say this. If they were to reach for a center, and I don't even think it's reaching, because I don't think he's going to be there when they get into the second round. I don't care what a mock draft simulator tells you. It's pick 60. I don't think Zach Frazier from West Virginia is going to make it that far. And I genuinely think if that's their guy, take him. Because he fits the profile exactly of what they look for in a football player, and it's a need. He can play center. He can play guard. There is no question of, oh, he might be a tackle or he might not be strong enough to.
He's an interior offensive lineman. And realistically, that's where your needs lie.
Exactly. He plays with plenty of power. He drives defenders into the ground in the run game consistently. The way he keeps his head up and on a swivel to pick up line stunts and blitzes, it's not Quentin Nelson, but it's similar in a sense. And it's one of those where you look at his wrestling background. I mean, he was 159.
I was going to ask, did he wrestle? Because if he did, Sean McDermott's already rubbing his hands. He's already clapping quietly in his office.
Yeah. So I think it's one of those where, like, McDermott, I could see falling in love with a guy like that. And it just shores up and gives you the assurance, like, we don't have to play this guy if we don't need to. But if we need to, we're good. And we're comfortable with it.
And I feel like somewhere in the top 90, the Bills are going to have to answer some of those questions of, hey, we think we have this solved. But thinking and knowing, like thinking you have a problem solved is what gets the Dolphins in trouble every single year. It's the reason that everything falls apart for them every single season is because they think that in September they have the solution. And by the time January rolls around, everything's falling off the tracks.
Yeah.
So when I look at the guys beyond round one, some depth options at center specifically, there's a couple who intrigue me, and I want to get your take on them. I'm not going to try to pronounce his Cedric Van Pran, and Hunter Norzad. Now these two guys, like Van Pran is huge. He's a massive dude. And he's been the linchpin in what has been a really good offensive line that's carried his team to the NCAA playoffs multiple times.
Yeah,
he blocks with a little bit of violence, which I like. I like seeing guys like being an Alabama fan and like watching the way that our centers are kind of taught to always be working. And if you don't have any, go find some. And that's what, who was the guy who got drafted by the Eagles? Landon Dickerson. Now, he was a little small for the guard, or he was a little small for center. And obviously they had Lane Johnson. You were never going to stop. But he found work. He was able to get out there, do some things because that's the prototype they enjoy. When I look at this, I see a guy like Van Pran, and I wonder, though, is he more size than finesse? Like, does he win more with just the fact that he's bigger than everybody? Because at the NFL level, that doesn't always guarantee you're going to be great.
Yeah, I think my thing with Cedric Van Pran, and I like him. He's my 86th overall player, my 7th ranked interior offensive lineman. I think he's a true center. He checked in lighter than expected at the combine at 298 pounds, so it makes me wonder, like, is that Garrett Bradbury 2.0, or is he going to fall into kind of his style of play comparison that I gave him? Is he Lloyd Cushenberry? Because when I watch him, that's what I see. And he's an experienced guy, 44 career starts, very good athlete for the position. He can get out in space. He shows that he can operate out there. And I think the most impressive thing is just the aggressive snap-to-step quickness that he has. He is so fast off the football. He's got strong hands. But yeah, the big question mark is the frame, and then just the overall lack of length, right? Like, he's only got 31 and 3/8 inch arms. So, like, Is he going to get too chest to chest? Is he going to be strong enough to anchor and withstand the power that he's going to see? But if he's there at pick 60, or if you feel like you can take, 128 and 133 and move some things around and get up into the late 70s, early 80s, and he's there, starter at some point. Maybe not day one. Maybe not coming into training camp and we're like, hey, he's out there with the ones. That shouldn't be your expectation.
Mm-hmm.
But when you push into the playoffs, and to your point, the Miami Dolphins, they're scoring 60 points in September, and then in January they score 13 because everybody's banged up and they don't want to play in the cold and everything else. You start bringing in that competition, and that was what you were talking about earlier. Same thing the Lions did. They were drafting guys at a lot of the same spots, and they're bringing in veterans. They're giving veterans 1-year deals and 2-year deals to prove themselves, and either those guys prove it or they don't, and either way, it makes those rookies better because they have to compete against that guy that's trying to prove himself. So I think Van Pran would be a great example of that type of rookie. And then Hunter Norzad from Penn State. I don't have a full evaluation on him, but good overall size, 317 pounds, experienced. I watched him recently because now that my guide is done, I'm starting to get more into the guys that I've been pushing off to watch, because my thing is this: I can watch film 24 hours, 7 days a week, but the more and more I watch the film, the less I'm going to get done. So I'm like, I have to cap this at some point and stop watching these players. But with him, he's got a great snatch trap technique. It's phenomenal in pass pro. It's one of those things where he grabs and he just brings them down. So I think he's going to probably go a little bit sooner than maybe we expected a month ago, but it's probably going to be a day 3 option, and the Bills have a lot of day 3 capital. So he might be a realistic option. And if I'm not mistaken, McGovern played at Penn State as well. So you got kind of that tie to maybe those guys come in and compete against each other and help each other out. So I think it'd be a really interesting storyline there.
The thing that I like about him, he checks a lot of boxes in terms of how his game, coming from the Big Ten and just how they play, that translates to the pro game. And then at the same time, he did really well against other Big Ten competition. Because again, you're talking about teams that run the football a lot. You're talking about teams that run traditional pro sets. You don't see a lot of that. There are some conferences in football that run, like for those of you listening to this who don't understand, you can have teams, like let's say you're the center at Oklahoma. You might go 2 games where your quarterback only lines up under center in a true like running formation, or a true like, hey, we're going to hand it off and there could be a play action out of this. Maybe half a dozen times.
Yeah.
Because that's the nature of those offenses and the way those conferences are built, and the coaches choose to coach. And so with that, the Big Ten offers you linemen who have experience in what they're going to see in the pros. And so when you see them succeeding at that, you can kind of look at that and say, well, he's lower than everybody, all these draft pundits have him in terms of his overall talent as far as they see it. But in terms of what we've been able to watch him do on a football field, he looks good. Yeah. And then he has a game against Ohio State where he just doesn't pick up twists. And there's some second-level blitzes that he never sees coming. And it's like, as a center, that's a cardinal sin.
Right.
So some of that's recognition. And so the question is, hopefully the Bills, hopefully are they doing their homework as to whether or not he can whiteboard this for them enough to make him seem like a viable pick? Or do they at least trust what they've heard or seen about him and his processing? Because that's ultimately, I think, going to dictate whether he goes day 2 or day 3.
Yeah.
I think if his processing is good and he proves that, hey, it was a bad game or 2, but that's not indicative of where my head's at most of the time, and that I think I can get better, you could be looking at a guy that the Bills in the 3rd round might be looking at saying, hey, let's not get to day 3. Let's just take him now and get a guy who can play in the interior for a while.
Right. And you bring up a great point as far as the Big Ten opposed to playing at Oklahoma or USC. Like a shotgun snap and an under center snap are 2 different styles. Like you have to do everything different within your lower body. And when you come from a spread offense, you're not necessarily dealing with pressure, a defensive tackle right in your face every time. Things are going to be spread out because they're trying to fill the gaps and get the speed out into space to try to stop that spread offense. Where if you're in a pro-style offense and it's more of a condensed box, you might have a Mike linebacker lined up in your face. You might have 2 inside linebackers lined up in both A gaps and a nose tackle over your face. And you have to snap and step and do all these different things. And it just changes the game.
If they both come, you're still responsible for your gap. Like, that's the thing that you try to explain. Like, even as a little kid, like, that was the thing that was getting screamed at us as we were screwing it up from the sideline was, that's your gap, man. And you just, you have to own it. And so you'd go, well, okay, but the linebacker came and he goes, no. That's your gap. I don't care if it's the tackle. I don't care if it's the guy behind him. I don't care if it's the safety too. You take all three of them if that's what you have to do because that's your job.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to see this process play out. And that's why I love guys like you hear about Mitch Morse, who wasn't a first-round pick, but he's been a long-time starter. You find some of these offensive linemen, especially centers. I feel like there's first-round centers who kind of come and go, and then there's guys who get taken in the third, second, fourth round, and they tend to hang around because they just have a pro-style skill set.
Yeah.
And they're smart enough, and they want to work hard enough for it. Because it's a sacrifice. The pivot sucks. I would wish...
And I was going to just say there's a sleeper at the position that I watched last night, and I'm going to have a kind of a film breakdown on him for the Lions Wire because I think he's a fit in Detroit. But that's Matt Lee from Miami, Florida. You know, he played at Central Florida for 3-4 years, and then he moved on to Miami, Florida as a transfer. Kind of same thing with like Cedric Van Pran, kind of maxed out frame, maybe at 300, 305 pounds. But his quickness, his aggressiveness, and his tape kind of gets boring at times in pass pro because like he doesn't give up any pressures. Like he's so consistent and he's a technician. He's going to go in the 4th, 5th, maybe 6th round. If he goes sooner, great. But just everybody you talk to, it's 4th, 5th round grade. And it's like, okay, he's going to go around that range. And he might be a plug and play guy at some point in year one and eventually take the keys to the car and drive it for an offense for 6 to 7 years with 70, 80 games played. And we often, I think fans forget that because we're looking for the gold jacket guys and all this sexiness that comes with drafting these players. And it's like, you realize how many players have played 70, 80, 90 games in the NFL and how long that is and what it takes to do that? Like, and I think Matt Lee could be one of those guys from Miami, Florida.
It's interesting, like having had a little taste of it, playing football myself, I was never good. I was never good, but I understood the concepts of what we were trying to accomplish. And then, like, getting to talk to and hang out with John Fina, like, just having that guy, like, I wrestled him in a bar once. I'll tell you that story when we're done here. It's funny when you hear about all the things they think matter and what doesn't matter.
Right.
And you find out that there's guys like John Fina was the first player to ever be franchise tagged. Like the Buffalo Bills did it because they were like, oh, we have to keep you around. When you think about blocking responsibilities, it's the trenches will never be sexy. So they're never going to get the fanfare that the wide receivers do or the quarterbacks do because they're not the ones you see running into the end zone with the ball. But at the same time, none of that happens if they don't do their job.
Right.
So you can argue they're almost just as important as those other guys. They'll just never get the love. But if you talk to them about it, they don't care because that's not why they're doing it. They're like, listen, I could, like, what was the one quote? The one guy said, he's like, I think it was Cody Ford. Now, he ended up not being all that great, but he said, he had a quote about how he goes, I literally get to fight people for a living. Like, I go to a fist fight. That's what it is. But I like that, and that's what I'm here for. And you go, oh, okay, you found a niche, sir. There's a narrow band of human being who's fit for this job, and you got to find the right ones if you want your football team to be good.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of tackles, Bills are going to go fishing in the late rounds. They always do. You know, there's the Jack Andersons, the Tommy Doyles, these guys. And Tommy Doyle was on his way to being good if it wasn't for multiple just excruciating injuries. I think back-to-back ACL tears and different knees. I don't know how you come back from that. Like, that's going to be rough. And at the same time, Jack Anderson was a 7th-round pick. All three of them, Spencer Brown, Tommy Doyle, Jack Anderson, all almost like 3'10", 312 a man, all over 6'5". They were monsters. And the funny story, you'll laugh at this, they all ended up on the same plane to Buffalo to come sign their rookie contracts.
Yeah.
and they had to move them around the plane to redistribute the weight.
The weight?
Because coming into Buffalo, you don't get 3-seaters. You get these little 2-seater JetBlue, Southwest Airline, and they had to shift them around the aircraft. Imagine having that conversation. It's like, what the hell are all of you doing here at the same time?
Yeah, I had to do that on the way to Mobile because I always fly in a day early before everybody else because I like to get in. I don't have to worry about Ubers and everything's available. If you get there on the same day as everybody else, it takes forever to kind of transport yourself to the hotel and everything.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm on the plane in Atlanta going to Mobile. It's like a 45-minute flight. It's not very long. And you're in this little plane, and all these players are on the plane. And they're taking the 300-pound guy that's in the way back and moving him up front and doing this and rearranging stuff. And I'm sitting in the middle, crammed next to all these massive humans. And I'm 5'10", 185 pounds maybe. And I'm like, I'm sitting next to everyone. I'm like, what in the world, dude?
What is happening?
Yeah, so I've been there and seen that, and I'm like, that is crazy, and you don't think about it when you're on the plane. You're just like, get me to where I need to be, and then I'm watching people shuffle around, and I'm like, what is going on?
So in terms of the depth of this tackle class, when you're talking about legitimate day 3 guys, who you think in terms of developmental swing tackles, who do you like the best?
I have 2 guys. I don't know if they'll be there on day 3. I think one of them might be. They both could be, but they're borderline guys. They're 3rd, 4th round guys. The first one is Blake Fisher from Notre Dame. Got to his tape late, but he made my top 100 as my 88th overall player, my 11th ranked tackle. He got a late 3rd round grade for me, but 6'8" or 6'6", 310 pounds, 34 and 3/8 inch arms. Former left tackle and basically lost that job because he got hurt and Joe Alt showed up. And
yeah,
one of those
Joe Alt.
Like, yeah. But
it's the Tiki Barber thing where it's like, oh,
yeah.
Hey, you got hurt. And guess what? Who does anybody remember who Tiki Barber's, who he filled in for? I don't. It's like, you got hurt and guess what? You're done. Because Tiki Barber just showed up.
Well, it wasn't Reuben Drones. It wasn't Ahmad Bradshaw.
Nope.
It wasn't.
Chris, you want to
give
it
the
a
answer?
Goog? Chris, you want to give it a goog? Who did Tiki Barber replace?
All right, I'll give it a goog. I don't need Reuben Drones being brought up on this show 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah, I brought him up last week because I was like, man, the NFL is in a way different place. Reuben Drones wouldn't have a job today.
Peyton Hillis.
Peyton Hillis, like the Great White Hope. The fact that he was on the cover of Madden is one of those things that I'll never forget. In terms of how absurd we get with this, like, oh my God, it's happening. There's finally a guy who broke the paradigm. No, he didn't.
Right.
That was a flash in the pan. He's incredibly lucky, and it turns out he's terrible.
Right. But back to Blake Fisher, just looking at his tape, great length to create separation in pass pro. He gets out of his stance quickly. He's very efficient in those 45-degree pass sets. He shows that he can anchor. He gets under defenders with good pad level. Strong lower half, and I thought he was a willing run blocker as well. I think he's going to be a right tackle in the NFL. I think he's going to end up being a day 2 pick, probably late, but if he's ended up slipping at any chance, and again, they have the capital to move up and potentially get a guy like this, so he could make sense, and I think he can be somebody that when it's all said and done could be a solid pro, falls into that category of 6, 7, maybe 8-year starter, and just carving out a role for a team, whether it's guard or tackle. I think he could play either one.
Well, and that's where this becomes intriguing to us as Bills fans because you go, how much are we spending every single year trying to fix this backup tackle problem or backup guard problem? Or how much money are we going to keep throwing at this if the idea is cap solvency so we can go out and make some sexy moves in the next 2 or 3 years?
Yeah.
Well, then what you have to do is you got to backstop your tackle position. You can do it here in this draft by maybe being a little aggressive by some people's standards, going up and getting a guy who probably could be starting for some teams, and then you hedge your bets because if contract stuff with Spencer Brown gets crazy, depending on what else gets doled out next offseason, you at least know that you've acquired a body that you can put in that can play the position. And I think that's it. I want people to get used to this philosophy of being – like it shocked people, and I was happy to see it. like the red wedding of sorts, when he just said, okay, everybody you were the heart and soul of this team for how many years? Done. Get out of here. We were calling for, like, people were saying $26 million in dead money was where we were going to end up. And I was like, please, those are rookie numbers. You're going to pump those up. We did it, baby. We're here.
Yeah.
So it's this thing of, we have a GM who knows how to be cutthroat and win. And I like that, because then what it tells me is he can also make moves like this where he's not above drafting potentially fringe day 2, day 3 guys to push an existing starter. Not even off the roster, just so that he never has to pay another Lyle Collins again. And at the same time, if things go sideways with Spencer Brown negotiations, I have a guy.
Exactly.
Cheeky Barber took over for Joe Montgomery.
Joe Montgomery. Guess what? Nobody knows him. Nobody cares. He's probably somewhere sitting at home, still lamenting the fact that he took that day off.
I think I knew that. I feel like my Google search history probably has Joe Montgomery on it because I clicked it after finding that out. But yeah, I would have never guessed that name. Never would have guessed it.
Anybody else that you like for the Buffalo Bills? And then we got to wrap this with, I think, what's going to be the crown jewel of the entire segment.
Yeah. The other tackle that I would throw out there is Delmar Glaze out of Maryland. I have like a 4-minute highlight video of just all 22 of this guy. I couldn't.
Where can people find it?
Twitter, X, at Russ NFL Draft. If you just put Russ NFL Draft Delmar Glaze, I'll retweet it so it's kind of closer to the top so people see it. But so much to like with him at 6'4", 315 pounds. I wish I would have watched more of him going into the Senior Bowl because he would have been a player I would have loved to talk to just one-on-one. But when we talk about getting out of your stance in a hurry, in pass pro especially, Glaze does that. He's always square and under control. His punches are timely. He's able to reset his hands quickly, really good grip strength. And I think it's a strong benefit in the run game to be able to steer defenders and then just create that rushing lane. But also in pass pro, he does it as well. And he's got a really flexible, kind of bendy lower half, which is nice. It brings his pad level down. But his hands, he doesn't always like strike. He more so tries to like latch and just It causes him to expose his chest a little bit, and I think he could get a little bit more consistent when getting up to the second level, but maybe him and Spencer Brown could work on that together.
Well, but also Aaron Kromer. Aaron Kromer does a good job of teaching his guys what he wants, how he wants to approach hand fighting. You watched this last year's Bills team. That offensive line was the line that he's been like, hey, I got here the first year. It didn't exactly go the way that everyone thought it would. We brought in Roger Saffold because we thought he could help. Nah. It all went to shit.
Yeah.
Then we got Torrance, and Torrance took to it like a fish to water. And then you watch the transformation of a line that could all of a sudden go, hey, we're going to run the ball 30 times today. And there's nothing you can do about it. You know this. You've gotten to live it now for a year. Where you go, hey, we're going to run it now. In weird situations when it's 3rd and 5, and we can keep a team honest and just run the football. Because everyone knows if it's 4th and 1, we're going for it anyway.
Exactly. Dude, I watched Jamal Williams score 17 touchdowns 2 years ago to watching him score 1 touchdown on a fake spike play that got Jameis Winston and the Saints basically banned for like a week. You know what I mean? So, it is a thing, like to establish that run game and kind of build that identity. It is a thing. And then just another player I want to throw out there at the guard position because he is one of my guys, one of the guys that I have as a player in my latest mock draft on Fantasy Pros, which came out a few weeks ago, so it's got to get some updating, and I'll have a final one in a week or so. But Christian Haynes out of UConn. He's going to be a plug-and-play guard for whoever drafts him. 42nd overall player, my 4th-ranked interior offensive lineman. And I know right guard isn't necessarily a need, but he might be able to play left guard. Either way, this guy's fun. He is fun as all hell. 49 starts at offensive line, at right guard. Like when we're talking pure guard, he is the best pure guard in the draft. Jackson Powers-Johnson is a center. Graham Barton is a left tackle, maybe going to play guard. Nobody is better as a pure guard than Haynes, and he is just a physical player, getting out of his stance. He demolishes the opposition. I have some clips of him that I'll retweet. It's like a car wreck. He is like a moving freight train just demolishing cars on the track when he's out in space. His brother plays for the Houston Texans. He kind of comes from a football family. He reminds me of Nate Davis when he was coming out of Charlotte. If people remember him, I think he was drafted to Tennessee. I think he's with the Bears now. But when we talk about finishers and guys that are, the best finishers in the draft, I think Haynes is definitely that guy for the offensive line.
All right. And now that brings us to the moment of truth. The 2024 Greg Little Award. You made everybody's day. People, like I said, people still talk about it. They go, who's that guy who crapped all over Greg Little anytime he's in the news or anytime he makes a highlight or when the Dolphins announced they were going to put him into the starting lineup and everyone's like, wait, didn't some guy in your podcast shit all over him? Yes. And rightfully so. So as an annual superlative for you, not just of the offensive line class, but then also give us one outside of that just to kind of show who else you're looking at. Who are the players who you feel are most getting overrated by the draft community and probably just not going to be that fucking good?
Yeah, I mean, for the offensive line, it was hard for me to find one guy there. But when we talk about just overrated player, I'm going to go to the defensive side of the football. I have to bring this guy up because I think Bills fans will resonate with it a little bit. And I don't mean to bring up old stuff talking about Aaron Maben.
Oh, no.
But I'm talking about a Penn State defender. Chop Robinson is one of the most boomer bust prospects in this draft. 37th overall player on my board, 5th round edge rusher. I've seen people say he's the 5th or 6th best player in the draft. I've seen some people say he's a top 20 player. To each their own. I'm never going to bash anybody's process, but when I watch this guy, violent disruptor that gets upfield in a hurry. He's got a great first step. He's got an effective rip move, but that's about it. It's very short and sweet to the point with his strengths. You go to his weaknesses. He turns his shoulders against the run. I mean, we're talking 6'3", 254, 32.5-inch arms. I mean, if arm length matters for Graham Barton, it should probably matter for Chop Robinson, who's going to line up against Graham Barton and other guys. And 32.5-inch just doesn't really do it for me. 34.5-inch vertical, good. That's a good number to have at 254, but it's not overly explosive. Good motor against the run, but struggles to get home on his pass rush, turns his shoulders too frequently, and he's that type of player. And when I wrote in his overall projection, much of his success will be determined on if he can get home against the pass more consistently and if he can get stronger against the run. And to me, those are two things that I'm not going to bet on when I'm taking a player in the first round. And when I see Chop Robinson selected at 12th overall in a mock draft to the Denver Broncos, I'm like, well, if that's the case, that's why the Denver Broncos are where they are. Chop Robinson, he might be good. I don't see it. He terrifies me.
What I find interesting is that when I look at sites so right now I'm looking at Walter Football because this is a thing, as you're saying, Chop Robinson. I started even just a few weeks ago talking about how defensive end could be in play for the Bills with their first round pick. Mm-hmm. This is obviously before we traded Stephon Diggs. But I'm like, guys, you could make a case for this. Even then I questioned the idea. I watch Alabama football. I know Dallas Turner is a great edge player. I don't know that he'd necessarily make a lot of sense for a 4-3 defense.
Right.
At the same time, Chris Braswell, I watch him play. He may not be as sexy as Chop Robinson, but technically sound and in terms of how you'd like a 4-3 defensive end to play.
Yeah.
If they were to take Chop Robinson over a Chris Braswell, you'd go, this is Aaron Maben. This is Aaron Maben-esque, and the college even fits. That's the worst part.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is with Chris Braswell...
It's the Arakpo thing all over again.
Exactly. And Braswell is a half point shy of Chop Robinson on my board. So it's that's how close I viewed those guys as players. I thought Braswell, he had a good counter, multiple counters where he was able to, whether it be, ripping through the arm over stuff. He's got the long arm, the speed, the power. There's so much.
You have to have nuance or you don't get to start for Alabama.
Exactly. And Chop, if you look at his production, he didn't produce and he doesn't have a ton of pressures. He wasn't getting home. He wants to beat the opposition, but once he gets past them, it's he's like, oh shit, I got by him. Like, I don't know what to do now. And it's just like, I'm not betting on that. And if I'm telling you guys, if that's the pick at 29 for my Detroit Lions, I'm going to be live on radio in downtown Detroit. I am going to be out of my mind. I'm going to be out of my mind.
You're going to be where I was when the Bills drafted Aaron Mabin, and I literally took a chair. I hosted a party. My house is full of people. I took my shirt. I got a whole bunch of beers out of the fridge, and I took a chair from the kitchen table, and I went and sat alone in the backyard and just drank beers. And everyone's like, well, can we go talk to him? And my roommates were like, no, leave him alone. Don't speak to him. It's not going to go well.
Yeah.
I got one thing. Russ, are you able to get your hands on South Dakota State tape?
I've seen some of it. I have not seen all of the games. Like, normally with the folder, you get like a bunch of tape, and you can normally get like 6, 7, 8 games. And South Dakota State, there's one game in there. So if you're talking about Mason McCormick,
nailed it.
I've seen
nailed it.
I've seen a little bit.
Drew, look at this. I'll pull up look at his RAS score over here. Look at that RAS score. It's 7th all time.
Yeah. It's interesting with him. I've asked around about him, and somebody had told me that be careful in saying that he's going to go, top 50 or top 100, because there's a chance that he does not. Now, the testing and the tape, to me, what I've seen so far looks kind of like it checks out. But I trust this person as far as talking to in the league and all that stuff. And I can tell you guys off air who that person was. Yeah. But it's one of those where when he told me, and I was like, all right, I won't go any further on this. So it's one of those where, like, I just don't know what to believe on him as far as a player. Again, measurables, everything checks out, and he might be great. But he's just an interesting name that seems to be going lower and lower the more I dig as far as talking to people.
So you don't see him being a Cole Strange who somehow just sneaks. I mean, I would say, unless the Patriots have anything to say about it.
Right, which they could. I mean, they could take him at 34, I guess. They need help on the offensive line.
They need help.
See, I was listening to our friends Brett and EJ at Bootleg Football, and they had Mason in the offensive gems. So I think he's projected a day 3 guy. And being that Drew, you talked about us needing guard help. I mean, look at that RAS score. You can't.
Yeah, but also.
But it's also South Dakota State. Who are they playing?
Who do they play?
Do they practice against animals?
Like, well, and this is it. Like, what are you?
But he had a great shrine too.
Sure, of course. There's always nuance, and that's why we go to guys like Russ to try to figure out, because you and I can sit here and look at RAS scores and go, well, that guy's good. Look at his RAS score. And I can look at, for as nuanced as I might be or unnuanced, like, I'm not going to ever sit here and say that I'm watching tape, because that makes me sound like an asshole.
Yeah.
What I know is that when there's a player that I like, sometimes what I'll do is I'll see if I can find old games somewhere that I can go back and just watch that guy. And it's just, okay, I know what a liability looks like, and this is against good competition. That's the whole thing about the Penn State guard or center that we talked about. I just knew, I'm like, okay, I can find this game somewhere and stream it online. I'm going to go back and rewatch this, and sure enough, he struggled.
Yeah.
And then you go, oh, okay, but then he doesn't struggle in his other games, so maybe this is just or maybe he has a tell, and maybe they understood that and they just exposed him. We don't know.
Yeah.
That's what all this is about. A lot of this, people get mad about it. It's conjecture, but we're analyzing something that people care about. You do a ton of it. Why don't you tell everybody where you do all of it?
Yeah, at Russ NFL Draft on X, Twitter, whatever you're calling it these days. All my draft content is featured on Fantasy Pros. If you want to do film reviews or learn about the Lions, there's stuff over at Lions Wire. I do a bunch of stuff with Jeff Risden and the guys there. And then Betting Pros, when football season gets going again, I'll have my favorite plays of the week with college football, the NFL, touchdown scores, the whole 9. And hopefully we cash some tickets there. But yeah, that's pretty much all of it. It's always a lot of fun. I appreciate you guys letting me come on and talk a little smack.
Guys, It's amazing. I love Russ. For some reason, I like Chris. I love you guys. But we got to get the hell out of here. I'm Drew Gear. That's Chris Kruger. It's Russ Brown. This has been your Rock Pile Report.